Shalom, everyone, and welcome back. We're going to recover some of what we covered last week because of the fact that, well, let's put it this way. We're going to start in chapter 25, but we're not going to start at verse 1. We're starting in verse 10. Now, the reason we're starting in verse 10 and not verse 1 is because the parshas do not line up with what the Christian theologists said should be the chapter and verse. And so it was the Christians who determined where the chapter headings were, where the verses were actually at. Now, on Sunday, when I was teaching the book of Psalms, we were in Psalm 112, 111 and 112. And those chapters are different than many of the others because of the fact that they actually decided where the verses should be as compared to where they were. According to the Christian, there were to be 10 verses, but according to the rabbis, there were 22 verses. It was a idea that was far different. And again, so as we go through this, we're going to find that, well, there's going to be some things that we're going to have to cover that we covered last week in order to make this week make sense. And so we're going to start, I'd like to start by going back, and I want to read chapter 25, and I want to start in verse 10. And I want to go all the way through verse 18, and then we'll begin a new chapter, but I'm not going to go there. I just want to go these 8 verses, if you will. So it begins, Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the Cohen. Now that's an interesting point, because at this point in time, Pinchas was not a Cohen, but Aaron was. And they were in the same family. But it goes on to say that the Cohen turned back my wrath from upon the children of Israel when he zealously avenged my vengeance among them. So I did not consume the children of Israel when by vengeance, and therefore say, behold, I give him my covenant of peace, and it shall be for him and his offspring after him a covenant of eternal priesthood, because he took vengeance for his God, and he atoned for the children of Israel. Now, the name of the slain Israelite's name, who was slain with the Midianite woman, up until now, he hasn't even told us who the male or the female have been. We've gone through the events, but he's never told us who we're talking about. But at this particular point in time, in verse 14, he says that this Baal was Zimri, son of Salu, leader of the father's house of the Simeonites. And the name of the slain Midianite woman was Cosbi, daughter of Zur, who was head of the peoples of her father's house in Midian. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, harass the Midianites and smite them, for they harassed you through their conspiracy that they conspired against you in the midst of Peor. And in the matter of Cosbi, daughter of the leader of Midian, their sister, who was slain on the day of the plague in the matter of Peor. Okay, so our story is a completion of what happened in the last one. And we understand that, again, Balaam attempted to curse Israel 3 times that we know of, or 3 times that are mentioned in this text. Now, there may have been more, but 3 is enough. And as we go through this understanding of these 3 texts, we come to the conclusion he had observed them from 3 different spots, not just from one, but he had gone around the entire encampment from one high point to another. Now, as he finishes this and he's unable to do anything, he again apologizes. I don't know if he ever received his due penance for all that he did, but anyway, he supposedly left. And he left Balak and told him, I cannot curse them, but I know you can get God to curse them if you allow your women to fornicate with their men. So the concept was that there was a religious factor that was going to be added into this story, that really doesn't get told except in the very last words when it says in the matter of Peor. So we're going to be dealing with a Midianite god and a religious system based on multi-gods versus the God of Israel. Now, as we're going through this, or as we start through this whole idea, I want you to understand that during those 3 times that Balaam tried to curse them, remember, he understood that every day God would find a point in time in which he would unleash his wrath, or could be potentially able to unleash his wrath. But during this time, according to the Arizal, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so there was never a point in time when Balaam even had the opportunity to do what he was going to do. So as we get through this whole section, we come to the understanding that he left Balak, but he really goes to the place of Midian. And again, talking with the king of Midian, because notice it's the Midianites who he deals with. Now, we know he could have dealt with the Moabites, but again, remember Deuteronomy 2:9 said that you can't mess with them because this is their land, this is where they're going to be. So evidently, the Midianites decided that they were going to take it upon themselves to bring about a curse from God. And so they understood and allowed their women to go into and near the camp of the Israelis. And as they did that, they also set up their tents. Now, according to the rabbinic stories, one of the things that we find is the fact that just as you go to the Church of the Sepulchre, when you went to Israel as a Christian, you had to bend over to get into the church itself. In other words, as the Jewish people understand it, you were bowing to the God of the Catholics. The same thing was happening when they entered into the tents of the Midianites, because in the tent with the Midianites was also their God. And so as they entered into the tent, they were also entering into Baal Peor. That was the religious system that the Midianites were using at that point in time. And so the whole question was, what's really going on? Certainly there's sexual immorality going on, but there was also the problem of dealing with who is God. That was happening. Now, as they began to enter into the tents, we know that there was a plague that was created by their entering into this. And by the time Pinchas acts, 24,000 men had already perished. Now, many of them were Simeonites, but not all of them. There were men from each of the tribes, except the tribe of Levi. And again, Levi held a strong understanding. We have to also remember way back in the beginning when Jacob had sons, and they were in the city of Shechem. Remember, Shechem was the city where he first settled, and he built his little ranch called Sukkot. And it was at that point in time that Dinah ended up being kidnapped and taken into the city. And it was Simeon and Levi who basically created a situation whereby all of the men became, well, what you call circumcised, and then they were slaughtered. So the temperament of the Midianites and the Levites, if you go back to the book of Genesis in chapter 49, you'll find out that Jacob has strong, harsh words regarding their temperaments. And so this temperament that they displayed will come out in this chapter, one on the good and one on the bad. And so as we're watching the story unfold, that's one of the things I want you to keep track of. Now, Moses is near the end of his ministry. In fact, he knows he's so close that he actually probably would have liked to have thought about how do I wrap this all up? But instead, he found himself in the midst of 2 crises. This one and the retribution that they were going to pay to the Midianites that's going to be found in the next set of chapters. And so this is where we're starting. So anyway, we begin our story with a word choice. I want to Well, actually, I gained the idea from Rabbi, excuse me, Rabbi David Jacobs. So I want you to turn to Exodus chapter 30. I taught this to my group on Sunday, but I didn't teach them the other half. Now in Exodus chapter 30, we're dealing with the half shekel. Now the half shekel, again, every male over the age of 20 had to bring a half shekel to the temple or to the tabernacle, and it would be used by the priests for the offerings and for the maintenance of the buildings. Now the word shekel is not in question, but I want to question the word half, because we're going to talk about charity for a second and what charity does. And so as you're looking at that, I don't know how well you read Hebrew, but it's in the line that is marked in this particular case 13, which is a Yud Gimel. And it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, seventh word in whatever text you're reading. And it begins Mem, He, or Mem, Het, Zadi, Yud, Tav. Do you find the word? Words are also based upon roots or bases, but each letter itself is also a word. And so when we look at the word, I want you to look at the middle letter. Look at the letter Sadi. When we think of the letter Sadi, we have to think of a Sadi, Sadaka and Zadik. What makes those two terms common is the fact that they deal with charity. A righteous man gives charity. And that's the center letter of this. So when we're talking about the half shekel, we're talking about giving charity. Now, giving charity oftentimes gets lost in our minds as to what's actually happening. I gave the example on Sunday. A man is standing in line to get a McDonald's hamburger, and he only has 90 cents. He wants to buy the hamburger, but he finds out he doesn't have enough money, and I'm standing behind him, so I hand him a dime. Did I do charity? And the answer is yes, I did. Now, I didn't buy him the hamburger. I just gave him enough to complete that purchase that he needed at that point in time. But where did I get that dime from? Well, it's money that I had earned. So when you give charity, you are giving a part of yourself. That's what's actually happening in charity. And that's why it is so important that we do give charity. Now, if you look at that as the center, I want you to look at the two letters, one on each side of that Sadi. And you'll notice it's a Het and a Yud. The word is Hai in Hebrew. The word means life. So when one gives charity, one gives life. Now, if you look on the outside, the last letters, Mem and Tav, you have another word. That word is met. So when a person gives charity, he gives himself life and he separates himself from death. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Now, I want you to go back to our chapter that we're doing, which is chapter 25, and we're going to look at another word. And I want you to look at the word on 25:11, to turn back my wrath. Now, in turning back your wrath, again, we're in chapter 11, chapter 25, verse 11. It's quite a lengthy place. Anyway, let me count the words for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes, 8, 9. Now, if you're looking at in our scroll, you'll find out it's the two words are on the outside. But this is the idea of wrath is Baal. But the idea that goes before it, to turn back. I want you to look at the word, and it's, again, Het, Mem, Tav, Yud. Again, if we use the same process we used in the verse in Exodus, what do you see? The two middle letters are death. They separate us from life. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when you're turning back the wrath of God, you're turning what could be, what is death, and you're separating yourself from life. That's what wrath is about. And so in our story then, we're dealing with a situation of death, which we see 24,000 will actually die from this process that they're going through. Okay, so far with me? So let's go back to verse 10 for a second. So Hashem spoke to Moses saying, again, the Lord spoke to Moses. What does he say? Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the Cohen, turned back my wrath. So we know the character is Pinchas, Phineas, whichever you prefer to use, son of Eleazar, that's his father. But notice how he describes his grandfather. The word is son, not grandson. The word is son. How can a man have two fathers? Well, the understanding that the rabbis have comes from the understanding of what our story is about. There's a Midrash that is written. Now, the Midrash that's written deals with, well, let me read you the Midrash. This is the one that Rashi talks about. It says, because the tribes of Israel were mocking him, Pinchas said, have you seen this fattener, or the son of the fattener? Now, the son of the fattener, again, Pinchas's grandfather is Aaron on his father's side. Pinchas's grandfather on his mother's side is Jethro. Jethro, only they call him Putel, which after listening to Ross give me a list of all the characters that have the name attached to him that belong to Jethro. What was it? 8 names, I think, go along with this creation of the word Jethro. Well, anyway, this is the character. He says, have you seen the son of the fattener? Jethro, remember, was the Midianite priest many, many years ago, 40. And as a Midianite priest, he would have been responsible for, in fact, that became part of what Moses was doing when he was in the wilderness. He was helping to fatten up the animals. He was shepherding at that point in time. So it says, have you seen the son of the fattener, whose father fattened calves for idolatrous sacrifices? So he's slurring Jethro at this point in time. And now he goes and kills the prince of Israel. Therefore, God traced his lineage not to his father, Eleazar, because you see, Eleazar's mom was one of Jethro's daughters. Moses and our character here, Eleazar, who will become the next high priest, both their wives were daughters of Jethro. So he goes beyond that first generation, and he relates himself to the character which we call Aaron. And I say to you that there was more in common between Aaron and Pinchas than meets the eye. Not that Eleazar was bad, it's just the fact that God lets us know beyond this fattening of the calf business, beyond that, we have a character in Pinchas who is much like his grandfather, whom he calls his son. Now, the thing about this whole story is we have to understand that Pinchas himself was not a Cohen. You see, the idea of the Cohen was established at the Mount Sinai experience. according to the legends, Pinchas was already born. And so he did not qualify or fall under the category of being a Cohen. He simply was a Levite. But after this event is done, God will ordain him personally. And so he will become a Cohen. Not only will he become a Cohen, but we know that he will have a lifespan that is far greater than any lifespan of that day and age. We can trace his life for almost 300 years. And yet after that, we have to understand that the rabbis believe that he actually became Elijah, the son of the prophet. And so therefore, the prophecy that he will be eternal will be carried out, because remember, Elisha never died. Elisha went to heaven in a fiery chariot or a yellow taxi cab or whatever you want to call it, something different than anybody else. So let's go back again. So we understand then that we were in the tent and the plague has been breaking out. But as the story goes, the Israelite man came, and we find out his identity, and brought a woman, and her name was Zimri, or her name was Cosby, before Moses. Now, that was back in the last verse of chapter 6. It's in chapter 25, verse 6, that we begin to see this. Behold, the man of the children of Israel brought a Midianite woman near to his brothers
Steve,
in the sight
I've
of
lost
Moses.
your audio. Can anybody else not hear him?
All right, I'm going to stay unplugged. My Amazon headset isn't working, or I'm not working, one or the other. So let's go through this. Cosby and our character Zimri come before Moses. Now Moses is, according to the story, is at the tabernacle itself. He and the elders, because they're now trying to decide, what are we going to do? Moses has the idea that he wants the leaders of each of the tribes to kill all of those in their tribe that are acting in an inappropriate way. Well, while this is all being thought out, Zimri brings Cosby and falls in front of, not in a tent, but out in the open. Now, there are some Midrashic stories saying that they were in a tent, but it appears as though, from the storyline, Moses could see what was going on. Now, the question was posed in another Midrash. The question was posed, is it wrong for me to have a Midianite wife since you also had a Midianite wife? Well, that wasn't the question. First off, yes, according to the stories, Moses did have a Midianite for a wife. But remember, this is before Mount Sinai, before there was a group called Israel. He did have a wife that was not Jewish. We also understand that she was Jewish in the sense that she even took care of the circumcision of the son. She had converted to Judaism. And so we know that this comparison is not exactly equal. But we can also hear in our sanctified imaginations Zimri calling out Moses for having this wife, and he takes pleasure with Cosby. That was what was going on at this particular point in time. Again, there's an understanding that Zimri really was not his name. For that, we have to go back and understand he is the son of a Simeonite king. Go back to chapter 1 in Numbers and look at verse number 6. Are you with me? For Simeon, Shemuel, son of Shaddai. So the king that was actually in charge of that tribe was Shemuel. Now his name is very important. And the reason his name is important is because of the fact that his name is a derivative of the name Solomon. Shemuel is a type of Solomon, which probably gives us the understanding of why there's such arguments going on at this point in time. Now, as Shemuel, we have to understand then that his importance was, well, let me give you something else. We get upset with Solomon because he married 1,000 women, right? That is a typical story. Why didn't he marry 976? Why didn't he marry 1,025? Why did he settle at 1,000? In Hebrew, 1,000 is a perfect number. As a perfect number, Solomon was attempting in marrying 1,000 women to do something that would have changed the world dramatically. He was about the idea of establishing peace on earth. All the marriages were convenience, but they were all about establishing peace everywhere. That was his point in marrying all these women. I mean, a man who can write the book of Proverbs, the Song of Songs, how can you call him a scatterbrain, somebody who doesn't have it all together? Because obviously he did. So anyway, our character has the same tendencies, the two men. And Zimri, if he was in fact this character, his name really wasn't Zimri. So then if his name really wasn't Zimri, well, what does Zimri mean? That became a new question. Well, the understanding is Zimri's means to cut it down. It's the idea of cutting a tree down, deforesting. Zimri was attempting to deforest Moses, to cut him down, to establish somebody else. Now remember, what do we've got going here? We've got Korah has done the same thing. Now we have Shmuel, Zimri, doing the exact same thing. And so he brings Cosby. Her name means to lie. So you have one who cuts down and one who lies, lying before you. And Moses and Aaron and all the elders are frozen. According to the Midrash, they just stood there and wept. It was the effect of Pinchas. Now, Pinchas was to be like his grandfather, or called his father, having the same attributes. And if you remember the attributes of Aaron, he himself was a peacemaker. He attempted to reconcile differences. He was the counselor. Remember, Moses was the hard line, Aaron was the soft voice. Pinchas held pretty much the same idea. He was the soft voice in the room. And so as the soft voice, he stood there for a moment, and then he became a zealot. Now we associate the idea with zealot. In fact, I went and looked up the definition of a zealot, and I found out that the word zealot comes from the Greek, meaning zelote, which denotes that someone is filled with or driven by zeal, which again uses the same word, which literally means hotness, figuratively means fervency and enthusiasm. So he was fervent, he was enthusiastic. But let's go to the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is kanem. A true zealot is one who stands up for God and, if necessary, takes the life of another. Do you hear the difference between the two? It goes on to say, to be a zealot, you cannot love being wrathful. Do you understand? You cannot love being wrathful. But you must do it because it needed to get done. That's the definition in Hebrew. So imagine yourself, Pinchas is standing there. And as Pinchas is standing there, the rest of the people are weeping. And before them is this orgy. We know that Pinchas then will pick up a spear. And according to this story, he will run it through both of them, literally picking them up on the end of his spear and holding them over his head. How much strength would it take to hold two bodies over your head? That is super strength. That's the strength of wrath. That's the strength of energy that you would not normally see. And again, if he was the character like Aaron, imagine how he must have changed in those moments in which he thrust it through them and started. So he's more like his grandfather at this point in time. Now, according to, I found the Jewish law that allowed Pinchas to do what he's doing, because you see, even in this, he follows a law. The law is called a law that is not instructed. A law that is not instructed. That's what he's choosing. That's where it comes from. And that's why he is not punished for what he does. So if you were a zealot and you went to court and you were complaining that there was an orgy going on and you went to the judge would say, you can't do anything until it's over, and then we will take him to court. Pinchas couldn't wait that long. He understood that actions had to be immediate. And so Pinchas never talked to Moses, never talked to Aaron, never talked to any of them. He simply grabbed the spear and he plunged it through them. Again, the idea is the fact that this is acting outside of his character. He is called a zealot at this point in time. Physically, Pinchas really was the son of Eleazar, and his mother was a Midianite. But spiritually, he was the son of Aaron. And so we understand that Aaron was a peacemaker, so he is a peacemaker. Now, I was looking through, trying to come up with comparables. Rabbi Brasowitz gave me an interesting one, and I thought it was kind of cute, so I'm going to give it to you. Think of a woman who has a mouse problem. She has a nice house, and all of a sudden she starts seeing little rodents running through. What does the nice little lady do? She buys a cat, and she turns the cat loose on the little mice. Now, did the lady want to buy a cat? Did she want to go through that killing? No. But it was necessary in order to clean house. And the same thing holds true with what Pinchas did. I was thinking about this and on television this week, there was an episode where, I can't remember the name of what big city, but it was a 3-lane highway that they decided to block because they were about clean air and they didn't like cars driving on the road. So therefore they were going to block the road to keep the cars from going on it. So therefore everybody knew. And the radio announcer or the TV announcer called them zealots. And then I had to go back to the definition of what a zealot was. But before I could go back to the definition, there was a man who was yanking and dragging them out of the way. And he was yelling at them, "You got to get out of my way. I'm on parole. If I don't get to work on time, I can go back to prison." What did they do? They restocked the road because, you see, they're zealots. That's not the definition. That is somebody who wants to receive recognition. To receive recognition. But anyway, so at this particular point in time, we stick the spear through them. He raises them up. The plague ends at that point in time. No further damage. But there were 24,000 that were lost. Now, this same chapter, and I'm not going to take long, but let me ask you the question. You've just witnessed Pinchas saving the nation, and you know you are about to die, and you're looking for somebody to replace you. Who do you choose? Do you choose Pinchas, who you know, or do you choose your student, Jacob? Now, Jacob's been faithful. Jacob's spent every hour of every day at his tent. Jacob has been the character who fought the war against the Amalekites. He led the battle. So who do you choose? Fortunately, neither of those, well, the decision wasn't made by Moses. The decision was made by God. And God chose Jacob, which I find very interesting. Because you see, Jacob really never completed the mission. Now, it was going to be obvious whoever replaced him was not going to have the face of God to look at. All of his messages would be through prophets, through visions, through dreams. And so God chose Jacob, or chose Joshua. And yet at the same point in time, I was always wondering today, what would have happened if he would have chosen Pinchas? Would there have been a revolution in the camp because they were so upset because of what he had tried and what he had done? After all, he's the grandson of a fattener of cows. Well, anyway, that's as far as I got.